Welcome everyone to Scrum in Construction. I'm your host, Dee Rhoda, and today we'll be hearing from an international panel of experts who have real-world experiences and successes using Scrum in construction. We'll introduce them in a moment, but first, a bit about this format. We want to hear from you. This is definitely going to be a conversation. So we want to answer your questions, so we want you to add those questions to chat so that those questions can be compiled and we can answer them at the end of the panel section. We'll be tracking them and hoping to get a really rich Q&A conversation after the panelists. Speaking of the panelists, let's introduce them. I'd like to thank you, panelists, for being here with us today and welcome. I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to start with Felipe, engineer. Good morning, Felipe.
Good morning, Dee. It's good to see you here again virtually. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Felipe, engineer. I am the Lean Director at McCarthy Building Companies. We're a national general contractor here in the United States. I have experience in the design and construction industry for over 20 years. Lots of good experience from working in many different states all across the U.S. with design and construction teams. I got started with Scrum about half a decade ago, and I've been enthusiastically using it ever since and sharing it with everybody I can, including some of the panelists you hear from today. So I'm super excited to be here. Look forward to hearing all of your questions. And if you're going to ask where have we done Scrum at our organization, it's everywhere. So it's possible and everywhere. Thank you so much, Dee.
Yeah, thank you, Felipe. Serge, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences with Scrum in construction and why you're using it? Go ahead and take yourself off mute.
I didn't notice that, yeah. So, hi everybody, my name is Serge. I'm an agile consultant for Xebia, Netherlands. I am from the Netherlands, and I've been in IT since a long time ago. But I do hold a degree in mechanical engineering. I've been an agile coach since about 2006, and in that journey, at some point in time, there was a construction company, or a large company that is actually doing Scrum at scale. And they want to build a refinery with Scrum at scale. And me being one of the experts in the Netherlands, they asked me, hey, Serge, can you come over and help us? And I'd like to share that experience. So that's me.
Great. Thanks, Serge. Fabian, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you're using Scrum in construction?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fabian Schwartz. I'm the CEO of the Scrum Network. I'm a native German, but I'm connected here from Bogota, Colombia. I've around 20 years work experience working in projects. My first contact with Scrum was in 2007 by accident when I started to work with a startup. They forced me to use Scrum. It was not by will or decision. And we started to use Scrum in construction because of a client. So we have also major oil and gas company here that wanted to use Scrum, and they asked us for help. So that's how we started.
Thank you, Fabian. Fantastic. And to round out our panel of international experts, we have Willie and David. Willie, you want to start us off?
Okay, thank you, Dee, and good afternoon, everyone from Ireland. I work with DPS Group Global, and I lead the Lean Performance team, helping our teams on the projects. I've over 30 years experience in design and construction, and we were introduced to Scrum by Felipe's generosity on one of his numerous visits to Ireland to present at the Lean Construction Ireland annual conference, and he shared his learnings with us, and we grabbed it and ran with it. Then the main reason and why we got involved with Scrum is that we see that there's an absence of collaboration and a lack of visibility and a delay in trying to resolve issues in construction. So that's our reason for using it. So I'll just hand off to my colleague David there now to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, Dave here from County Cork in Ireland. So I'm a Scrum Master and a Scrum at Scale practitioner with the help of Scrum Inc. So I'm the SME at the moment with DPS in Agile Transformation. So I'm currently working remote, as many are at the moment in this challenging time, and I'm helping our colleagues, clients, trade partners adjusting to this by using Scrum and Agile. I'm a family man with 3 children who wondered what does Dada do, so I set up a Scrum board for them, and they didn't ask again. So avid cyclist with over 25 years in the construction industry. So since I was a small boy, I've been in construction. I've had my own business for over 10 years, and the big recession put an end to that. I have a master's in project management and at present DPS of over 200 people involved in Scrum teams between customer, trade partners and the DPS teams themselves. We have over 30 teams, and at present this is ever growing and we aim to improve. I've worked from concept design to project closeout, and when DPS expressed interest in Scrum, it was music to my ear. And
Yeah,
thank,
that's
Scrum
fantastic.
Scrum
Yeah.
Inc. and Felipe for that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. Thank you. Now, folks, I'm going to again ask you if you have questions. We'll be taking them at the end of this webinar. So please put them in chat so that our producer can find some themes to some of these questions and we can start addressing them after the panelists have had an opportunity to share some more in-depth experiences with Scrum and construction. And speaking of Scrum, I'd like to introduce you to the concept that Scrum is used across a multitude of industries. It makes sense that Scrum is now being executed in design and construction because this industry is intense, it's complex, and there are many moving pieces. And as we know, Scrum handles, speaks to, and works with complex adaptive problems. So before we get started though, with the panel, I would like to introduce Scrum Inc.'s very own Chief Product Owner, Matt Jacobs, because I'd like Matt to very quickly describe how Scrum Inc. got involved in this industry. Matt?
Yeah, so our path to the construction industry really started a year ago about today, where we started noticing a lot of construction companies started reaching out to us. They had been doing independent research, or they had come across Scrum in different parts of their business, and they could see how it connected to the construction work, but were looking for help in actually bridging that gap and making it their own. They were looking for case studies, and this was relatively new to us. So we started reaching out and trying to bring together a lot of this Scrum and construction knowledge and understand what others were doing within this space. And this really reminded us actually how Scrum has continued its adoption, of how it's been breaking out and changing different industries around the world. The Agile Manifesto laid out a mindset that revolutionized how people worked. And then software companies around the world started rapidly adopting Scrum even faster, as it gave them a way to operationalize the Agile mindset. As these technology companies became successful, others were looking at them going, what are they doing? And it started breaking out of the IT world to oil and gas, to consumer products, to actually some of the world's leading militaries. And then it started entering the construction space. And it's supposed to leave others in the construction space, similar to what happened to technology companies and some of these other manufacturing companies, leaving their competitors wondering, what are they doing differently? But the question is why? The construction industry has been stalling in productivity while the rest of the markets have seen a rapid increase in productivity. This is due to a lot of different reasons, and some of it is just the growing complexity of today's construction processes. Construction companies then started looking around going, what are others doing differently? How are they breeding some of this efficiency? And they really started adapting lean based on some of the success in manufacturing. However, unlike manufacturing, construction is more variable due to the amount of outside variables that are affecting construction job sites. I think one of the things that was said best to me by US Special Forces commander is lean made them efficient, but Scrum made them lethal. The question is, how does that work? How has that been happening? So construction projects are not inherently complex, but as we've learned, challenges encountered during execution and the adaptation to those challenges makes construction extraordinarily complex. Scrum actually builds on top of lean to adapt more rapidly to those complexities and the real world by enabling the teams to actually react to the things that they're seeing in front of them It builds a framework to actually manage and pull in some of those new information as they evolve, focuses on getting clear goals, increases the overall collaboration, and it provides, most importantly, construct to have a plan, but doesn't get us overly wed to the plan, so we can adapt to the realities that are happening on the ground and build that right into our plan. And I'm going to want to throw it back to the panelists to talk about how Scrum allowed them to do that and adapt and react to real world challenges faster.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. So now we'd like to hear from the panelists. We'd like to hear from the people that are doing this right now and finding successes. And I'd like to start with Felipe. He's got some great information for you on how and where you can start using Scrum in construction. Felipe.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dee. Just let me get a visual from one of the panelists, or Dee. Can you see my screen?
I certainly can.
And you can hear me. I'm not muted. That's awesome.
You're not muted, although we will mute you if you don't keep this in your time box.
So let me start my time box here. Okay, it's going. All right, I'm going to share one example from one of my favorite teams. I don't tell all the teams they're my favorite, but they are. Anyone who's using Scrum is my favorite. So disclaimer, use Scrum, you easily get to my favorite list. Before Scrum, we have a team here that was thinking about, we need to hire more people to keep up. This is an estimating team in one of our offices here in the United States, 7-person team with someone acting in the traditional chief estimator role. And these are just some funny pictures for those of you that know a chief estimator. You can see some parallels here, right? And then we also have the estimator. For those of you that have been in projects too long and you forget what estimators do, they're basically magicians. So that's what they do. So this team was working about 1 to 2 projects a year. That's before Scrum. And then after Scrum, they started asking different types of questions like, I wonder if our team is too big. Same 7-person team. There have been a couple changes. People do rotate in and out. And then they've now gotten all the way up to over 9 projects a year. How did they do that? Well, they did it using Scrum in a way that only a graph and some numbers will show. So let's look at some graphs. Stay with me here on the left. Here we have this team from 2016 to 2018, working about 1 to 2 projects a year, doing traditional construction estimating, 7 people. And then we got here with Scrum, what happens? They start using Scrum after a simple lunch and learn, 30-minute introduction. They start using it individually, and then as a team, at some point in the future, say, why don't we start using it as a group? We're tired of working nights and weekends, and we want to work easier and better. So they stop working weekends. They get up to working on 3 projects at a time while working less hours. It's amazing. And that's all within the span of 4 months. And then the team starts tracking velocity, and they want it because they now have capacity and want to improve again. And they double their capability in less than 30 days. Unbelievable. And then the team says, well, what else can we do? And they keep using the Scrum framework. Now it's been over a year. I would consider this a very mature Scrum team. And then you can see as all of to today, from back in the beginning, they are 9x where they were in 2018 today in less than 2 years. Some of the things that you don't see on the graph, you don't see the new, deeper connections and teamwork that this team has and uses. I always tell the team, each one of them I could work with forever. And I stay in really close touch with them. And we have much deeper relationships now today than before. The work has changed from transactional to highly collaborative. And we've seen tremendous growth on each one of them. The numbers speak for themselves, but I can't stress enough what has happened to the people on the team that aren't shown in the graph. The team has been transformational. Recently, 2 weeks ago, an owner came into our office to spend time with this team so they can see why they do what they do. How do they do it? And how can they take it back to their organization and do the same thing? And now we're helping the client. We're partnering much deeper with the client on other projects and other work. And I think that's something that is not shown on the graph, but it's something very typical of our Scrum teams. And we see that also in other teams in construction, but I wanted to focus on, just this one team here. So I'm going to just stop sharing just for a second, because I want you just to focus on what's not in the graph. The graph is beautiful and their output is amazing, but that's not the reason why they picked it up and not the reason why they did it. And how I started with it was similarly. I was frustrated. I was doing okay, but not getting enough done. My client wasn't satisfied. And even though I knew Lean, I had been practicing Lean for a long time, when I started using the Scrum framework, it made all the difference in the world for my client and the people that I was working with. And this estimating example shows the same thing. And we see this time and time again with so many different teams of how when you put the customer in your process front and center, as the Scrum framework does so well to bring the PDCA framework into living actions for you to do daily, it's so transformational. I can't stress enough. Don't focus so much on the beautiful stories you're going to hear. Think about the impact of the people doing the work. That has been priceless, extremely priceless. Dee, I've got more time in my time box, so if you can ask me one quick question, or I'm going to give it back to you.
I would like to build on what you're saying, Felipe, because so often I see on job sites, on construction sites, a high amount of turnover with these teams. And what you're talking about is providing them a different way of working that provides them a higher level of collaboration, a higher level of motivation. Have you seen a drop in turnover rates on these construction sites while using Scrum?
Yes, we have. We actually have. And, we're facing a skilled labor shortage like everybody else. And now with the teams that we've seen that have this framework in play are much more stable teams. They onboard new people, even interns that come into these teams that are on active construction sites where the teams are using Scrum for all things project management. And the interns have reported back how different it is to go to that job versus their last internship. Even if it was with us, but with a different team, the onboarding that they get and how they connect in with the group has made it so that people don't want to leave. I mean, we had somebody on this estimating team, as an example, had gotten multiple offers after graduating from college. And she said, I'm coming back to this team, this office, because of how they work.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
And it wasn't the most, highest paying job. So, I mean, that says a lot about, people making that choice. Thank you, Dee.
Yeah, no, because, and the reason why I was asking that question, Felipe, is because there's a high amount of cost to the company when you have these high turnarounds, and just being able to keep those turnarounds down would be great. I have one more question for you. What's the value being delivered by this particular team that you introduced to us?
Yeah, so this team is delivering estimates, and also contracting for new projects and existing projects and handling, large things for clients. So what that's doing is it's giving clients the ability to make better decisions and faster decisions, so that is transforming the ability for clients to pivot and partner better with their design partners as they're making these decisions on scope, on their buildings and various different building types. So we've had a lot of great feedback from clients. Thank you. The quality of the estimates are also increasing. We're giving the customers the numbers in the way that they want at the time that they want, which is phenomenal.
Great. Thank you. That question actually did come from the audience, and I wanted to sneak that one in since we did have some extra time.
Yeah.
But now, I kind of cheated a little bit. And just a reminder to the audience, please put your questions in the chat functionality within Zoom so that we can compile and theme those questions and get the panelists back to answer those at the end of this webinar. So, hey, Serge, I would love to hear from you how you got started with Scrum and construction and where. This is a key question that I know a lot of our audiences have. Where do you start?
Yeah. So thanks. So I'm under NDA, so I can't talk to the specifics, but it's in the oil and gas industry, and so that organization wants to build a large refinery and do it with Scrum at scale because they had some previous very good experience with using agile techniques in their business, and therefore they, me being a Scrum at scale expert, they needed an extra hands on the floor, and so they asked me in, which was super interesting. And what I want to do is actually kind of share three crucial things coming into this industry and figuring out like, hey, that's interesting to me as sort of a newcomer, being super experienced in Agile, but not as much in construction yet. You know, even though my mechanical engineering degree helped a lot in understanding what was going on. One of the things that speaks to the nature of like, is it applicable? Is Agile applicable here? And of course, in the sense of like, you know, can you inspect and adapt a lot? Well, yes, of course, in construction, there is this, you know, this caveat, because, you know, you start spending your money and for a long time, you spend about maybe 5% of your budget. And then there is this big, you know, moments like the premiere, and then boom, you start spending all your money. And that's when the construction actually happens and the materials are being brought in, and 95% of the money is spent. And you're really preparing for that moment. So, you know, I joked a bit like, you know, there's building a refinery is a two-stage process. It's prepare to build refinery, right? And the difference is 5% to 95% of your money. And in that process, I thought, well, there were like three interesting things I saw. Is that cross-functional teams were something which was really new. So everybody was so used to being electrical engineers with electrical engineers, mechanical engineers with the mechanical engineers, and never will the two meet. Or I'm overdoing it a bit, but, you know, roughly speaking, and that was also how the teams were set up when I came in. So I said, okay, you know, what are your teams like? And they said, oh, here are the mechanical people and here are the electrical people. And then they're doing Agile. But I said, well, you know, Agile is really about product orientation. So what about this? So what if you have your refinery or your factory, whatever it is, and if you think in products, what can you do to autonomously, you know, split the whole thing into modules, like big chunks of, and you can build them together. This module feeds into that module, this module feeds into that module. And by the way, you might have a team that does integration, you know, to connect all the bits together. And so for them, that was like, how interesting. So we switched it around. And that I thought was one of the interesting things, how much of a culture shift it was for everybody, that all of a sudden mechanical engineers and then process engineers and electrical engineers were together in one team and really had to get used to kind of building stuff together. And that was also really nice. And it still was a very nice experience. So then how do you kind of do the scaling up? So you have a chief product owner who is responsible for the whole refinery, the whole vision. And then you have a product owner for the module. This says like, I have a vision on the module. I'm trying to build it within the context of the refinery, and then you go on. And then finally, like for instance, the integration product owner is then responsible kind of, you know, okay, how do all the bits and pieces fit together and all the piping that needs to go around. That's not unique to a module, but it's kind of like the general infrastructure. So that's how we set it up. And that's really what I think was one of the great things, is that there was a massive amount of communication across all these fields of knowledge. And that really, like, you know, improved the situation, I think, for them a lot. Another thing I want to point out there within that context was that, of course, in this world, how much tendering and procurement, it plays a massive role, right? You have to buy stuff, you have to buy in people and materials and everything, which is a very complex thing of you know, bringing documents back and forth. And so there, we basically also said, well, let's bring the tendering and into the teams as well, make them part of those teams as an integral part of, if you want to build the module, the tendering is an integral part. So put your procurement people in your teams. And then there is this technique from this Swiss guy called Mirko Kleiner called Lean Agile Procurement. I'm also doing that. And so we use those principles to kind of make the procurement like a discussion and a dialogue instead of the classic, you know, very long procurement process, which we also expect to help a lot. And finally, the third thing I'd like to share is that to a large extent, this is an engineering issue. And this is kind of where my own mechanical engineering background came in, is that what I've noticed and seen, and also when I did a course on extreme engineering with Joe Justice some time ago, is that engineers can build modular. They know how to do this. They know how to, but they tend to not have that as their main goal. So there was one example that, you know, I discussed with one of the engineers there, is that when they have two modules and they need to be connected together, two pipes, and the flanges need to kind of connect up exactly because they have to design for that. It's like designing for predictability. So we design and we design and we design and we make drawings and make sure that they line up to the millimeter. What if you don't do that? What if I said, you know, and I had examples like that a lot. What if you make sure that you don't build the flange just yet, or make it flexible so that by the time you put everything together, it doesn't really matter if it's 5 centimeters off. And then you can just, you know, move the flange or build it in on the spot there. It's just a simple example, but I think it shows to how the moment you put that type of a problem or that type of thinking to an engineer, they will solve the problem. And I think this is nothing new, really, right? It's about modularity and building for reliability, but also terms like advanced work packaging, which I learned about then, was like, that's, I see, you know, that's a concept I see really gearing towards the agile way of thinking. So I think a lot of it is there is a lot of already modularity and ideas in the construction industry. I just think they don't realize what they already have. And it was basically up to me to point out, hey, there you got an agile thing. There you got an agile thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really what I share, those three things.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing those three things. And as you were speaking, one of the things I heard coming out is in how you created teams that were cross-functional. You brought skills into the team. I mean, you even put procurement onto the team. And we do that in Scrum all the time. In Scrum, we need those cross-functional teams. We bring all the skills to get work done onto one team. So that's great. And another thing I think I heard you say was that you're providing an ability to create known stable interfaces within your engineering practices, which is, of course, very familiar to folks who use Scrum and Scrum at scale. We always have those known stable interfaces between those teams to help build that up. So thank you for that, Serge. I really appreciate that. So next up, I'd really love to hear, Fabian, can you give us some more details on the how? How did you get started doing this? I mean, what kind of Scrum practices or artifacts did you put into place?
Yeah, sure, Dee. Let me start. My time box also. Okay. So when I was preparing this talk, I was actually going through some slides from a talk I gave a couple of years ago in Minneapolis and found this slide. This is a 15-story hotel, magnitude 9 earthquake resistant, built in China in 6 days. So when you think about this, actually connecting with what Serge says, there are two phases to construction. Like, one is preparing everything for construction, and the second is construction. Now, in these 6 days, they probably spend 95% of their money, but it's only 6 days. So the real challenge is not in the construction itself, in my opinion, it's before the construction. Now, why I got involved with that was because of Drummond. Drummond is a mining company with major oil or major gas exploration in Colombia. And one day, the vice president of the gas division called me and invited me for a conversation. And he said, Fabian, so we have two problems in our company. First, people do not collaborate the way we want them to collaborate. And second, critical information is not where it should be at the moment we need it, or information or communication saturation is low, in other words. He also had Jeff Sutherland's book on the table and said, well, do you think Scrum can help? I said, I have no idea, but let's see what we can do, because it was the first time I was involved with something outside technology in Scrum. So we looked at this. And so in theory, Scrum works best in an environment with high uncertainty and low cost of change. Okay. And also in theory, if you look at any project, doesn't matter if it's construction, if it's technology, if it's whatever else, at the beginning of each project, you usually have high uncertainty. When you move towards the end, the uncertainty is low. On the opposite, in the beginning of each project, cost of change is relatively low. For example, if you change something in your design, is different than if you change a wall that you have already built. So at the end of a project, cost of change is high. So technically seen, on theory, looking at this, like every project has a part where we can apply Scrum, which is at the beginning. We took out the cash flow for oil and gas projects. And what you can see is at the beginning, which is exploration. It's actually a perfect place where you can start. Exploration means basically drilling gas wells. Okay, and cost, well, is not low, but relatively low, because still can cost millions of dollars. And it happened that at that time, I was sitting at a Stanford faculty club talking with Professor Raymond Levitt over a glass of wine about this problem. And he said, look, my colleague Martin Fischer just published a book, Integrating Project Delivery. So I got this book. It doesn't talk anything about Scrum, but basically explains how Scrum is used in construction. So at the beginning, you have to define measurable value. So the product owner defines what is the value he expects from this construction project, and then we design towards this value. Second, we have to understand that we have an integrated process, and we have to produce small modules, same like Serge says, that you can put together more or less flexible on the construction side. Third, we need multifunctional, cross-functional teams that collaborate around those modules. In the past, we said they should be co-located. Now they have to be virtually co-located. In my opinion, one of the most important things is how you get feedback. So it's important in your design phase that you have some idea how to get feedback. Like in the past, you would have like plans and paper models. Well, now you can print 3D models or have highly sophisticated computer modules that you can use to get feedback. Now let's get back to oil and gas and to Drummond. So what we did here is, in the beginning, we basically trained the whole executive team, including the vice president. He became the first product owner. We used only one product backlog, sprints of 2 weeks. And we started implementing Scrum by the book, basically, Scrum at scale by the book, to be honest. And the results are tremendous. So if you look at this, same as in construction, like the most money in drilling is spent when you actually drill, millions of dollars. The average drilling time before Scrum was 19 days. The fastest well ever drilled was 10 days. Now, three months into Scrum, the drilling time, the average drilling time actually is down to only 6 days. Well, what's the major factor, right, beside of Scrum in general? So they had something which is called in Scrum at scale an executive action team. So all the high-level executives would have a version of a daily Scrum each day, where I talked about what are the impediments to move forward with drilling, and almost all the impediments were solved the same day. Not all impediments, but almost all impediments were solved the same day. While before, that took them weeks or sometimes months because of the silo effect they had created with their departments. So they were so happy with those results that Alberto Garcia, who was then the vice president, sent us this comment. But by now, this division became so successful that they created their own company that's called now Drummond Energy, and they use Scrum everywhere to basically look for gas and produce energy. So with that, back to you, Dee. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Fabian. You really provided a lot of rich information around the how, and I really appreciate that. A question we have from the audience to follow up on that is, can you give us an example of what an increment of work looked like at the end of every sprint? And you said these were 2-week sprints, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's basically a gas well completely drilled. So they have really a gas well that produces gas at the end of each sprint.
Wow.
Actually, by now they almost get 2 gas wells at the end of each sprint. So
that is a fantastic success story.
No half increment with half value or no value.
Yeah, half of a well drilled is no value at all, right? And in Scrum, we deliver value to our customers at the end of every sprint, and you're doing it as you're drilling wells. That is great. Thank you so much for that. Now we're going to turn it over to what I call the dynamic duo. These are 2 folks, Willie and David, and they're going to take it away and explain a little bit more on where they started, why they started, and how they started. Start us off, folks.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Dee. So just to give some background and context to what we do, DPS Group Global is an international provider of professional services in the construction and engineering sector, and also with procurement, construction management, and the commissioning and validation of plants as well. And they work across many markets, including biotech, pharmaceutical, medical advanced technologies, and life sciences across the globe, okay? So employing almost 2,000 people across offices in 15 countries, and they enjoy repeat business of over 85% with their clients, which is very important, okay? And also importantly, their workforce has grown by 50% in the past 3 years, and turnover has increased by 35%. So with that increase, certainly, and that growth, we have found a need for effective and agile communication and collaborative working practices across the group and within its projects. So if we look at the screen here, you can see the various stages of project execution, from feasibility and concept right through to production readiness. And a key area for us where Scrum and its concepts have shown advantage is in the handoffs between the various stages that you see here on the screen. Like traditionally, these would have been siloed areas between departments, and the problems would have been in the handoffs. So clarity around next customer expectations, transparency around readiness and the viability of the handoffs, and of course prioritization around working on the most valuable outputs is the key to effective progress for us and the business that we provide for our clients. So as well as that, we use a tool of lean construction across, it's called Last Planner System, across our design, our construction management, and our commissioning teams as well. And as you can see in this here, what you're doing is you're breaking the schedule down into smaller chunks or smaller batches, and you're planning in greater detail as you approach the work. But the major issue in construction is the delays or the latency in decision making that is caused from these constraints that occur at the point of work. So what we're trying to do is to look ahead proactively and evaluate the tasks and what inputs are required. So then we take these constraints, and we've found the greatest advantage is applying Scrum to these constraints to get them resolved and removed very quickly. So just before I hand over to David, I'll just throw a few stats on what we've achieved with this. Before Scrum, from our data, it was taking 12 days to remove each constraint or impediment. A project we have recently completed, we have reduced that time down to 5 days, which was great progress. And on our current project, we have improved that process as well. It now takes 3.5 days and consistently improving just to get quicker and quicker at resolving these constraints. So David will take it from here and go into a little bit more detail on some case studies.
Yep, so we've 3 case studies. So if we look at the first slide here, case study number 1, we did the commissioning. So it was the life end of a plant. It was a very challenging project, a very sizable project, and it was the first of its kind. So we had been working in a physical board where we were moving post-its across the wall as such on our boards, but we moved into a virtual space. So why do we do that? We wanted to get coordination between home office and site-based teams. So then when the challenge of COVID came our way, we were slightly ahead of the curve here because we had started with the virtual boards. So that just eliminated some of these communication channel problems we had, and the additional boards, in this case, on this project, we had up to 6 boards running at any given time. Boards used to start and finish depending on what phase of the project we were in. So the communication channels, again, were between non-site and site-based, trade partners and the client. So we got faster, more direct decision-making between source to destination and back again. So we were using the Scrum at scale, as you see in the picture, but this was the Scrum of Scrums. So
oh, looks like we lost David.
Right, I think we've lost David, so I'll just take it from here. So he was just, what he was about to complete with there on this slide was that he was escalated with the Scrum of Scrums up to a higher level, and we'll see that in the next case study as well. So in this study here, this is a new pharma construction project, and what we had here, and this was the biggest breakthrough for us, is that we actually got the trade partners here to put their own constraints onto the Scrum board here, or to the Trello application as we were using here. So they were able to put them up on it, and then literally as we were closing out the project, twice a day we ran our 15-minute Scrum. We were able to prioritize the major issues that had been highlighted that was needed to release the next batch of work, or the impediments that was causing the biggest grievance, shall we call it. But the most important point here is the collaboration of everybody on the team, and the fact the trade partners were able to raise this themselves, okay? So I suppose the good thing about Trello here, and I've just brought this one up, a particular clash between a door and a conveyor in a clean room. You could see where the information, while some engineers were working remotely and even in different countries, in real time, we could post the photographs of the issues that were up there, and people could just get straight into it and sort out what was there. So again, like I said about the stats in reducing the time, the silos were broken down. We were able to resolve the constraints very quickly as well. So just moving on to the last one here, this is one single client, 3 major projects on the plant that's going on. And the key point around here is that each project have their own scrums, shall we call them, on site. But the most important point here is the escalation to the executive action team. So each project manager, product owner have their scrum meetings in the morning, but before midday, any issues that need to be escalated from these 3 separate projects can be escalated to the executive action team. So this is the Scrum at Scale working, we feel, in a very good place at the moment. Now, obviously, there's always room for improvement. So I'll leave it at that, Dee. Hopefully, Dave might be back with us.
Yeah, it's a shame we lost him, but thank you so much for picking it up, Willie. That was great. Willie, very, very quickly, on one of the slides that I think you were presenting, you had, I believe it was a formula, PPC minus TMR minus TA. You had a couple of acronyms there that I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, they're all acronyms in the last planner system. So it's got to do with planned percent complete. If we had 10 tasks to complete on our work plan this week, and if we got 7 of them complete, that's 70%. So people can go read up with the literature on last planner system or on the Lean Construction Institute, or I'm sure Felipe can elaborate or direct everybody there.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just for the audience, Last Planner is a tool that is often used in design and construction. So, and we'll leave it at that. But now I'd like to get us into the questions portion of this program, because we are getting a lot of fantastic questions, and I want to make sure we get some time. Panelists, I'm going to ask these questions, and I'm also going to ask you to be, again, clear, concise, and compactful with your answers so that we can get to as many questions as possible. The first one here, I know I did ask Fabian this already, and his product increment at the end of a sprint was the actual drilling of the well. So I'm going to throw this one out there to you all. Describe for us, what is a product increment at the end of a sprint, for example, Felipe, in the work you're doing?
Yeah, so let's go with a construction team, because they seem to be overwhelmingly hitting up on the chat here. So in a construction team, using all things project management, you might be doing contracts. So for example, there might be stories on your backlog about issuing a contract to get a subcontractor on board to start doing the work. We're in the exciting part where we start spending a lot of the owner's money, is the construction part, right? We love the design too, but so teams can use the Scrum framework to write, bid, and execute on contracts to get people on board and start building. That's one example. Also, we've had teams, before shovel to win the work. Marketing and business development teams use the Scrum framework to respond to requests for proposal. So the increment could be, getting a proposal draft ready, and it could also include, first round practicing. So all parts of the business can be broken down to their small little parts, and the increments can be those things that we can see where we're going to create value for our clients and customers. And for trade partners, they love this when teams are using Scrum in the construction and we're working on change orders, because changes do happen and they're not free, but they're relatively inexpensive depending on who your GC is. We consider trade partner change orders complete when the trade partner can bill for them and get paid.
Yeah. Okay, great. I want to build on that question of what does an actual increment look like in design or construction, but how do you slice these really big projects? I mean, some of these are multi-billion-dollar construction projects that we're working on. How do you slice those into smaller pieces that you can actually fit into a sprint and get that product increment out? Which panelist would like to take that question?
I can take
Serge.
it partly. I'd like to take it partly because I think it also, because I also would like to answer a bit of the how to get started.
Yeah.
Because project where I was still very much in the design phase, and so one of the things in teaching and helping the organization figure out how Agile can help them, I said, well, let's Scrum the waterfall, right? Because the large part of the design is a lot about creating documents and creating like all that stuff, that the designs, things like that. So the first step I thought was going to be useful is to, well, if we take a document and consider that to be an output, let's just, do iterations on those documents instead of trying to create whole documents and then, sending them over through a very complicated process and then, hopefully have something at the end. What if we iteratively create them, which was already a kind of a culture shift already, right, in the way they're used to working. So that was kind of a strategy to say, okay, so then if you now know how to scrum these documents, then, which is easier, of course. It's a lot easier than the actual construction, of course. Now let's look at the construction itself, and with the lessons you've learned, now can you apply that to your construction business? So that was maybe part of the answer. So what can iterations be in the design phase? Is that you can use your documents and start your agile journey there. That would be your answer.
All right, great. Thanks, Serge. I really appreciate that. Listen, we were continuing to get questions around the how, a deeper dive into the how. My question to any panelist that's willing to take it is, what does the product backlog look like? How is the product defined by the product owner, and then that definition of product get built into a product backlog? Who'd like to take that?
I can take that one, Dee. I think
Okay.
we start with if you're putting your product owner hat on and you've at least read the Scrum Guide, which I recommend everybody listening, please go and read the Scrum Guide so you can get your head in the game of what is all in the framework. Start with the goal first. What's the goal of what you're trying to achieve? When you start with the goal first, the backlog becomes very obvious. So like in that estimating team, their backlog consists of delivering estimates for, today 9 different projects. So that's where they focus on what are the deliverables coming up in the next 30 days, and they'll also forecast out. They'll even sometimes look out as far as 6 months. So they'll take those and then use the calendar and figure out when do we detail these more, and then the team at the closer planning starts to pull those in to the work increments in sprint planning or sprint backlog, as the current Scrum Guide calls it.
Yeah. Hey, Felipe, did I just hear you say planning poker?
I did say planning poker, but I do have the team example that I showed does use planning poker.
Okay.
And if you want me to elaborate on that, so what planning poker is a way for more mature teams that are using velocity to track the number of valuable work they're delivering. They'll actually get together, they'll sit around a common table or do it virtually depending on where you are in your COVID need. And they'll talk about what the work is. So they'll take the backlog items, pull them into sprint planning, and then they'll say this item here. They'll talk about what it is. They'll show their cards. And there's some good videos on YouTube on planning poker. I think Scrum Inc.'s got a YouTube channel with a lot of good content as well.
Yeah,
but what happens when the teams talk about the highs and the lows where they don't all agree, which happens a lot, there's a much richer conversation about the work is. And that we've heard from the teams is so valuable to hear what exactly is the work, and it helps with the definition of done, and the team speeds up as a result of doing that.
Yeah. And it also helps with knowledge transfer, right? When you're using planning poker, and I know we've had a question in the chat about how do we improve knowledge transfer. Planning poker is a great way to improve that. And I'm going to keep us moving here because I've got lots of questions left.
Yep.
But I'm curious, how do we involve leadership in this world, in this industry? How is leadership involved, and how do they participate and support using Scrum in construction? Which panelists would like to take that question?
Thanks, Dee. I might take that one there. Yeah, I suppose what we've been very fortunate with is that it was our leader, our operations director, following Felipe's presentation, that really took this on and supported us in going forward with it. So definitely, as one of the critical success factors, having leadership support and having them in place is critical for enabling this on a project. Now, what we're also finding, there may be some that may be unaware of the benefits of it. So what David and I are finding, that if we can get a little case study together, or like the statistics I showed you there, show the success we've had from a pilot project or a case study in the past 3 months, we can then present this to other project managers or other directors that may wish to use it on their project. So that's how we're trying to involve leadership in it. So maybe somebody else might like to take it.
Yeah, William, we see that word of mouth is a great thing as well here internally. So like we have internal disruptors as well, people that are kind of zealots in the area. So we have an Irish red setter, but like we're kind of being like the Irish trendsetters at the moment in the construction industry. So look, that to me, it's part of word of mouth as well. I suppose just if we can revert a second to Felipe there, a second to go on the backlog. Like I think the backlog, everybody just needs to get stuck into it. I suppose we're lucky in one way with a lot of construction, especially in construction execution, that we have a schedule which can be used as a storyboard, and then just take them items out, the bigger parts, and get them into stories, and then start working these things out. Just start would be the big advice here. Just start.
Yeah. I work for Scrum Inc., as you know, and we are getting deep into Scrum and construction. And what we're finding as we go out and talk to these construction companies and start helping them to see their way forward using Scrum is understanding that we just simply need to get started. We need to start these experiments, and we need to learn from the experiments on how we can continue to use Scrum in construction. And that's not necessarily unique to the construction and design industry. That's across all industries. A lot of businesses, a lot of companies, they're just trying to figure out, how do we get started? And the way you get started.
It doesn't have to be perfect, Dee. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
And Dee, I want to just pile onto that. I mean, one of the best things I heard Dr. Sutherland say, I just call him Jeff, but you know, for those of you who don't know, he said, you don't need your leadership to give you permission to do it. Who controls the work that you do every day? It's you. So like David said, just get started. You don't ask for permission, just do it. Read the guide, start experimenting, start iterating. You know, look into the industry. There's a panel here, but just the people here, we've touched thousands of teams using Scrum in the design and construction industry. I mean, you probably know at least one person who knows who's done it, at least started, and they're going to tell you the same thing, like David said. Just get started.
Just get started. Start your experiment. Learn from it. Inspect and adapt. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, here's another across industry-wide consideration. How do you get Scrum teams and non-Scrum teams to work together and to communicate, specifically in this area of design and construction? What have you experienced, panel, in trying to get the Scrum and the non-Scrum teams to work together, to collaborate, to communicate?
Depends on the type of.
Oh, hang on here. I saw Serge first, and then we'll go to David. Serge.
Okay. I think it depends on the type of collaboration. It depends on the relationship of the teams. So if you have a supplier team, so if you're in more of a, we are internal to the project and we're delivering a module or anything, and we need a whole bunch of suppliers, but they're waterfall. That's a somewhat different dynamic in the sense that what you do then as your own team is that you could say your own backlog items are all about managing the other team and interfacing with them, etc. And then that's how you interface with them. An alternative is the waterfall team is, you could say, on equal level as the other teams that are running Scrum. And there's a very common technique which is not unique to construction, but anywhere we've applied it, is kind of using portfolio walls. Like the technique I use, like portfolio walls, is just a simple wall of stickies, which you can make as beautiful as you want it. But the stickies wall works, where you basically have a lane per team, and all those agile teams are basically synchronizing with each other, going like, okay, what are you going to do? What were you going to do? Because it's all about the conversation again. It's not about how do you apply it, but how we're going to agree on each other. On that wall, you can just make a lane for all the waterfall projects or all the waterfall teams, and simply point out that's when they're going to deliver. That's when they're going to deliver. So it's not so much about communicating in the wrong way, but it's really about when we sync up. That's really the thing you want to do, and kind of like a wall with all the work streams on it and synchronizing that just works wonders. I've seen it work perfectly fine.
Great, thanks, David. In 60 seconds or left, can you build on Serge's answer? Yeah,
I suppose we're all seeing the challenges in integrating Scrum into our traditional ways, and there is a mindset change needed. So like construction has been very much command and control down through the years, but like there is huge benefits in just trusting the team and speeding that information sharing up, where we can get to from source to destination as quick as possible and get that decision latency out. So it's just the risk of over-reliance on a few people. We're relying on a team, and it's the team effort, and just release that human potential, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Great, thank you so much. So want to deviate just a little bit into a conversation about advanced work packages, AWP. and how that fits into the mindset, as David had mentioned, of sprinting and working iteratively and incrementally. Which one of the panelists would like to address advanced work packages and how they fit into the work that we're trying to do differently? Felipe.
Okay, so for those listening, Advanced Work Packaging comes from the Construction Industry Institute. It came out just shortly after the Lean Construction Institute published works on Last Planner System of Production Controls. The two of those are meant to be pull systems. Advanced Work Packaging just as a very prescriptive process for how to plan the work, and it's typically used in large mega projects like $1 billion plus. There are a lot of companies in the Construction Industry Institute experimenting with it. It is, to some degree, a pull system. It's not as easy to use, I think, as Scrum, just based on what it takes to start up and implement. So I think in terms of like the heaviness or lightweightness of the two methodologies, or even the three, Scrum is the lightest and easiest to use, and teams can just pick it up and start. You don't have a lot of administrative overhead. In Advanced Work Packaging, you kind of have to almost be a EPC company, engineering, procurement, construction company, to have the right type of groups set up to let it flow and make it happen. So just keep that in mind. Reach for solutions that make sense for the type of business you're in.
Yeah. So
Great.
Felipe, the question for you then: if you use Advanced Work Packaging as a starting point, and then apply what you know about Scrum to it, could organizations kind of move towards, you could say, an agile version of it?
Yeah, and there are. I actually have a friend that one of my friends in the Great North in Canada. I'm going to shout out to Tanis. She actually does this in her practice. She is an AWP consultant and she brings a lot of the agile methodologies to how she uses it. And the feedback she's received is that it's better than people that just understand AWP by itself. So agile definitely helps to make it easier for teams to transition and use.
Yeah, that was kind of my take on it as well, as I learned about it. Yeah.
But
Great.
gents, would the definition of done be what you're trying to hit with your work package there? So you've set out the definition of done before you've started.
David, I don't have enough detail to answer that one. We don't have any teams using AWP currently, so it's all secondhand knowledge.
And we don't have any more time.
Perfect.
I'm so sorry, guys.
We're saved.
And we don't
Thank
have
you.
any more time. I apologize for that. What I'm enjoying here, and thank you, Willie, Serge, Felipe, Fabian, David. Thank you so much for coming to our first of what I hope will be many webinars to dig deep into all of these topics on Scrum and design and construction. So now Matt, thank you so much, has pulled up for us. We're actually going to have a Scrum Master class September 17th and 18th. And this Scrum Master class is specifically for Scrum and construction. You will get an accreditation as a Scrum Master, and you will get a focus badge on Scrum and construction. And I know that was something that was in the chat. So if you can, please join us for that class. It's filling up fast, so if you can get your seat now, would be a good time to do it. And again, thank you all so much for your time. And thank you, audience, for the fantastic questions. So sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but that just means we'll have another webinar to address those questions as well. One final thought here, this webinar is being recorded and will be reposted, so please share. For those who couldn't make it today, I know it's a Friday and we're starting a wonderful weekend, as some of us already have. Appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you all again next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. God bless. Be safe.
Take care.